Let's do it. I'll press it. I'm pressing it.
Did you get wasted at the
I pressed it.
wedding last night?
No.
No.
Hello, everyone. We are live.
Did you think about it?
Brian's asking me if I got wasted at the wedding I went to yesterday.
Well, I was actually just wanting to see how you'd react taking that question as we went live. Like, I don't actually care. Did you? I am curious. I don't care if you like what you drank. I care about what you ate. How was the food?
It was pretty good, though. Actually, the night before, so I went to a wedding yesterday, but the night before was my wedding anniversary. And we went to a really fancy restaurant called Canoe in Toronto, and we got the tasting menu. And I had some really fancy food there.
Really tasty.
It was so good.
So
and,
you've been going out a lot for like a young parent.
Yeah, well, as you can see behind me, I've got some guests here. My wife's mom and sister are in town. And so, yeah, Thursday night, we went out to a rehearsal dinner for this wedding. And then Friday, we went out for our anniversary dinner.
Rehearsal dinner. Who is this? Do I know this person?
No, you don't.
Do you work with them? Like, how do you know?
It's Dina's friend from school.
Oh, okay.
So it's not someone you would know.
Have I met them?
I
met like Dina's friends, but I don't know. I don't know.
Well, you were at my wedding 10 years ago.
That's true. I was.
And she was there.
Okay. Well, congrats to her. And so what did you eat? Wait, did you get to eat the same thing twice?
No. The rehearsal dinner was like a farce. Like, it was fun. We just like all went to a restaurant, and it was like they paid for our dinner at a restaurant.
So what's the rehearsal aspect of it?
I think it was like, it's just a ceremonial term for just like them treating all the wedding party to thank them for like their support.
I feel like a rehearsal dinner is like you actually are rehearsing.
Maybe like in like traditionally, but this
generally
couple,
I think otherwise you just say like, we're going out for dinner.
Well,
we're taking you for dinner.
Look, Brian, what do you want me to do with this? Like, I'm just telling you what happened. Like, I can't. Do you want me to pass this message along?
You need to report this to the appropriate authorities.
Okay. Anyways, we're live here, right, for our hockey podcast.
Yeah. Well, I still want to know what you ate at the wedding.
Okay. Well, I mean, there was like appetizers being handed out, during the cocktail hour. I had there was like quiche that was good.
I'm just like, what's the main? Like, what was the?
Oh, the main was like an eggplant. It was like a stack. It was like eggplant, and there was like that. What's that cheese? Like that? Oh, ricotta.
Like a little lasagna thingy.
The whole, it was kind of like a
lasagna.
Yeah, it was good.
Cool. Thanks for filling me in. Was there? Okay, I won't ask any more questions about the food. Joe is mentioning rehearsal dinner is the dinner after the wedding rehearsal. Elon, did you go to the wedding rehearsal?
They didn't have a rehearsal. Okay, I'm sorry to tell you.
They need to learn. I mean, they're married now. Like, they should know.
Actually, if anyone needed to rehearse, it was the officiant who made a really funny mistake during the ceremony.
Did he or she or they screw up the name?
He screwed up worse. He said at one point, and now we're going to go to like Carol something for a reading. And then they were all like looking confused. And I think he realized that he had like copied his notes from like another wedding.
Yes.
It was like there was no Carol.
Where's Carol?
It was so awkward.
What if like someone like jumped? Would it have been better if some random named Carol like stepped into the room and said, "Hi, I'm Carol," and gave it?
What would she read?
Something that she'd prepared for another wedding.
I guess.
Damn, that's embarrassing.
It was really funny.
Once at a funeral, the officiant called my mom by the wrong name.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, it's kind of fake. Like,
how do you call that out?
Why do you even have an officiant? Like, it should be like just someone that you're at. It should be like an MC that you're a friend of yours, especially at a funeral, right? Like these religious figures or whatever. It's like, just get the person who to talk about, it's like someone who knows your mom should do it, not someone who has to like write down a crib note of like her name.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't like my mom's funeral. Like, it was.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, unless. Yeah. Okay. No. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's start the show.
Are you ready?
I mean, this is like the biggest day in hockey news ever.
Huge day.
Talking about eggplant and all.
Biggest day since when was the last time? What year was it when Karlsson was traded? 2018, 2017.
You should have that up, man.
All right. Google Erik Karlsson trade.
Let's go back on game day news. To that.
That wasn't there.
Okay. I think we should start the show. So let's do it. So I'm going to do it now.
Karlsson traded to Sharks by Senators.
Okay.
I was right. It's 2018.
Good call. You said 2017 at first, I think. Okay. All right.
I thought 2018.
Cool.
We just make the show like what I'm thinking.
Okay. Ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. Yeah! Yes! Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest-running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by two guys who have a whole bunch of red boys and green boys to talk about, players who did differently in the first half. Psych, just kidding. Obviously, there's pushed to the side because the biggest trade of all time has just happened today, and we're probably going to spend the whole show talking about that because our namesake is going to a new team, and I am here, Elon Dubrovsky, with my very good friend, my very good friend. I'm too excited. The fantasy hockey robot, the poobah prognostication, the guy who the last time Erik Karlsson was traded did a huge rant on the show. So I'm curious to see if that's going to happen again. It's Brian Com. Brian, how are you coping on this crazy day?
You know, this time it's a little less emotional for me now that, yes, it's the biggest trade since September 13th, 2018, which is the last time Erik Karlsson was traded to the San Jose Sharks. He has received another Norris Trophy since. The Sens have received a Norris in return at the time. And I actually don't think, Elon, like, this is not like it's a big deal for where Karlsson's going, but it doesn't feel like as big a deal for where Karlsson is leaving this time around. And maybe I say that as someone not in San Jose. And keep in mind, the Ottawa return was so it ruined my day. I actually had like a 2-hour drive just before I found out. I spent the whole drive just thinking about how mad I was. And then clearly I ranted on the show and you remember. So maybe that's how I would feel that way if I were a Sharks fan today, because they did not get a whole lot in return except long-term cap relief for one of the greatest defensemen ever to play the game. So good job, Pitt. We'll talk more about it, but it's very exciting to see Karlsson on the move again.
Yeah, well, Brian, I feel like now if you're going to have a conclusion like back in 2018 saying like, oh, what a meager return for San Jose, then obviously we'll have to expect that in 3 or 4 years, we're going to think the complete opposite, because if just to break it down, Ottawa ended up, when the dust settled, got the pick that turned into Stützle, got Josh Norris, and I think something else. Like that was a really good return in hindsight. Yeah,
that's the joke, right? Like, as I was mad when the Sens drafted Tkachuk over Zadina and made this Karlsson trade. But the thing is, everything broke perfectly for Ottawa in the aftermath of that deal for things to work, at least to get Stützle. Like San Jose had a really unexpectedly bad season that gave the Sens the pick that was good enough to get Stützle. Josh Norris turned out to exceed any of the expectations around him when he was a prospect. And I just don't know that upside even exists for San Jose this time around, which is a bummer, right? Like I'd love to say wait 2 or 3 years, but honestly, which piece are we looking at to step up?
Well, clearly Kyle Dubas is a little bit smarter than the Sharks GM at the time, because that first round pick that San Jose is getting from Pittsburgh is like protected for I think top 10 protected. And the Sharks probably were just like, we're getting Erik Karlsson. We're not going to have to worry about like making our pick top 10 protected. We're obviously going to be a cup contender year in, year out now.
Yeah, and, it's funny because like the top 10 protected thing became a thing because of Ottawa. The first time when they traded Matt Duchene, for Matt Duchene, and they traded the pick that became Bowen Byram because they had a terrible season that they weren't expecting. And then they received a pick that should have been lottery protected, but wasn't. And ever since, teams know better, which is like, it's a little less fun. Like I would love teams to have to not have that ability and say, no, we're going to have to actually play well enough to have this not bite us in the butt. But anyway, so it is.
All right, so we've got a lot to get to. Norma's in the chat here saying, "Oh damn, I missed the start of trade talk." That's just preamble. We haven't even gotten into breaking down the trade. I haven't even said what the trade is yet, but it's going to be a really fun show. And there's also a lot of other news, and we do still have, because if you recall, the last time Brian was on the show with me a couple weeks ago, in between, by the way, great show with Victor Nuno. Definitely check it out. I had a blast talking about Dynasty stuff. But the last time I was here with Brian, we were getting into this spreadsheet I made of players who had a very different first half and second half of the season. We talked through a lot of the green boys, the players who got better in the second half. We still have a few of those and some red boys, the players who did worse in the second half that we were going to break down. I don't know if we're going to actually have time to get to them because we have a lot of news, but we got that in the doc. And it's August, still the beginning of August. We got lots of time over the month to get through everything that we have planned. We actually already have another fun show planned for next week, but we'll squeeze it all in. Before we get to all of that, starting of course with this big trade with so many pieces we need to discuss, let's mention Keeping Karlsson, proudly presented by DobberHockey.com. They've got the guide out. I'm sure they're going to make some changes now that this trade has happened. That's the great thing. If you already bought it, no worries, because you'll be able to go re-download the PDF and they'll have updated projections. And if you haven't bought it yet, yeah, now's a good time. It's the world famous Dobber Hockey Guides. Check it out, dobberhockey.com. Okay, Brian, first of all, the news. Okay, let's break down this trade. Erik Karlsson is going to the Pittsburgh Penguins. How should I break this down here? It's a 3-team trade. I'm sure everyone listening already knows this, but I just got to throw it out there. Okay, so Pittsburgh is getting Karlsson. Then they're also getting Rem Pitlick. They're getting like a 3rd-round pick from San Jose. They're getting a prospect. Okay, so and then they're giving away a first. Then they're giving a 2nd to Montreal. They're dumping Jeff Petrie on Montreal and covering some of his salary. I should have mentioned San Jose is covering some of Karlsson's salary, but not very much, only 1.5 mil. They're also giving Casey DeSmith to Montreal. Montreal is also getting a prospect named Nathan Legare, and San Jose is getting a Granlund, who's a dump from Pittsburgh, Mike Hoffman, who's a dump from Montreal. Though, of course, Granlund and Montreal, who are dumps for one team, might actually end up being top sixers on another team. So we'll talk about them, I guess, when we get to the Sharks. And I think that's pretty much it. Obviously, the main headline is that Erik Karlsson, the best defenseman in the world, like Brian said, the reigning Norris Trophy winner, 100-point getter, Erik Karlsson is going from the Sharks to the Penguins, which means I need to do the following. I know it's an audio podcast, so Brian will have to describe here, but I came in wearing my Sharks hat, my Sharks jersey, because I've been an Erik Karlsson guy. I follow him wherever he goes. So here we go, Brian. I'm going to hand the mic to you.
What's going on? Oh, okay. There's a
Let's
Pittsburgh.
go Penguins.
Wow. There's a Elon, to describe everything that happened, Elon lifted his Sharks jersey to reveal a mid 90s era Penguins jersey with like the black and gold Pittsburgh diagonal down the front with the newer penguin. There's a name for it. The flying penguin type of deal on the shoulder patches. What a beautiful jersey. Who's on the back of that?
There's nobody, actually. There's room. So I'll have to go and find a place to put that in. But yeah, very exciting. I actually have a Crosby and Malkin on my Dynasty League team. So it's going to be super fun this year. And actually, Victor, who I had on the show last week, we were talking all about our teams. And as you recall, I'm sure, Victor made a big trade trading for Erik Karlsson. So I feel like now it's great. If I play him in the finals and Karlsson gets points, I'll be happy because I'll be getting points also whenever Karlsson gets points. So we all even out. It's going to be so fun. But yeah, let's talk about Erik Karlsson going to the Penguins. Okay, this is a guy, like we said, has just come off an incredible season on like not even a great Sharks team. So like generally when we're talking about fantasy and we talk about a player like going from playing with like Matt Benning as his like D partner and I guess playing with like Hurdle and Couture as the forwards with like not much else, now going to a Penguins team with like Crosby, Malkin, Gensel when he's healthy, we'll get to that, Raquel, like a better team. You would think, man, that just must mean that Karlsson's going to be like even better. And he had 101 points. Of course, on the other side of it, he's 33 years old. He's had injury troubles for a bunch of years. It's like San Jose wouldn't have even been able to give away Erik Karlsson like at all, like a year ago, right? Like no team would have taken him, even if they would have been like, we'll cover 1.5 mil of the contract. Like if you cover half, maybe I'll think about it, and still probably not. He only had a 57-point pace 2 seasons ago and only played 50 games. But after this season, it's hard not to get excited about him now on the Penguins. I know the Penguins have Chris Letang, but I don't think this is a situation where Like, and you could correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't think this is a situation where we have to be worried that like Letang is going to eat into Karlsson. Like, I think like Dubas has like made this move. He's taking on this cap to give Karlsson like the primo, like he's going to run the power play. He's going to get a bunch of ice time, and like Letang, we'll talk about like how that affects him. But I feel like Karlsson's going to get like the same deployment pretty much as he got in San Jose, unless of course they want to try to keep him healthy for a playoff run. So I guess overall, yeah, the big question is, what do you think this does for Karlsson's fantasy value? We've been doing mock drafts. Do you think now like Karlsson is going to start going like higher in mock drafts or lower or stay the same?
I think this probably puts Karlsson a little lower in mocks, just because, Elon, I'm with you. I don't think Karlsson is going to like have to look too closely over his shoulder for Letang. But at the same time, there is somebody else who can do the thing that Karlsson is there to do, who is older. But I'm looking at Letang's power play production from last year, and his points per hour was almost identical to Erik Karlsson. And over the last 3 years, Letang has actually been a better points producer on the power play, going by rate stats, so per 60 minutes on the power play, than Karlsson. So one might argue that Chris Letang has been better at quarterbacking a power play over the last few years than Karlsson, but I'm not actually gonna sink into that. Although, like you said, Elon, it's not very long ago that Karlsson was really struggling. One thing that helped Karlsson in San Jose, I think, was Burns moving on, right? And now he's in a situation where there's someone again to split time with, but it might not be the exact same split. Either way, I'm a little less high on Erik Karlsson than I was before. And that is to say, I'm still high on Karlsson. I still think a lot of what we saw last year was real. Not all of it. Like another 100-point pace season to me would be unlikely, just because there was some variance that was working in Karlsson's favor. But he showed that. I think he still like showed that sort of that top end 70 to 80 point defenseman form that we just hadn't seen from him for a while. And we know he's been battling injuries too. Last year, touch wood, everybody, he didn't miss a game. And so if that means he's fully healed and fully ready to go, I would love to see him keep up some measure of that 70, 80 point pace that we become accustomed to seeing top flight Karlsson manage. If not, maybe 55, 60 points it would put him back where he was the last couple years, except for I'm ignoring the 35 point pace that he had in 2021. But that's about where he landed in San Jose with Brent Burns. So of course he had some good seasons in San Jose with Brent Burns too. But I guess the headline here is Karlsson going to Pittsburgh. I expect him to take over quarterbacking the top power play. And also, Elon, I'm sure you're about to say this, but keep in mind, for the first month or so of the season, we've learned that Jake Gensel is not going to be in the lineup. He just had surgery on his ankle. So there's space for Letang and Karlsson to both do their thing on the top power play for just a month. But of course, when at the draft table, you want to pick the guy who's going to be there the whole rest of the way. And what this also does to me is it hurts Letang's value a fair bit. I have been watching Letang fall in the mock drafts I'm doing with Keeping Karlsson patrons that are organized on our Discord server. Elon, you're doing a bang up job. Every time we have 14 interested managers, boom, a new mock draft starts. We're on our 21st already. I've been in 3, and in each of them, I'm seeing Letang fall to a place where I'm feeling pretty good about grabbing him. I know last season didn't look great, a 53-point pace. And of course, there was a lot of streakiness and in the lineup, not in the lineup, not IR eligible, all of that stuff, which of course you can't control and you hope just isn't a factor. But under the hood, I think Letang actually had a pretty good year last year and would be slated to do better, except for the fact that now Karlsson's in the picture. So while I was ready to grab I don't know, round 5 or round 6. This is in a 14 team league. So do the math, maybe around 70th overall Letang to be my 1D. Now I'm not so excited about that. And I might need to think of another target for my draft day.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to dig into there. One thing I was going to ask you about this whole discussion of if Karlsson or Letang is better at running a power play. I guess one thing I was looking at is Pittsburgh was the 14th ranked power play in the league, which is I guess average, right? So I'm just curious to know if maybe, they want to do better. So they think maybe Karlsson will help them do better. Maybe they can't. And obviously there's a lot that goes into it. They had like a bunch of injuries last year, including Chris Letang obviously being injured for a lot of last year. So maybe that actually plays into it. Maybe when Letang was there, they were higher than 14th, because I'm just looking, I just Googled it and I went covers.com was the first response for ranking NHL power plays. I don't know if you have like,
I've never mentioned them in the credits before.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Hockey Viz's isolated impacts, and I'm seeing that Karlsson Letang had similarly, like surprisingly, but similarly little impact on the power plays that they helped run last year. Like Karlsson was a very small net gain. And so isolated impacts on Hockey Viz are ways to try and figure out a player's individual contributions. Like if you replaced him with anybody else, would the power play have been as successful? It's not, would the player have gotten as many points? It's would the power play have been as successful on the whole? So according to those, Karlsson Letang did a great job doing what they did. But most people could step in and the conversion rates might not have changed terribly. One other thing that I think is worth like looking at, we don't know who Karlsson's playing yet in Pittsburgh. If he's on the first pairing, that means he's probably with, I don't know, Ryan Graves or Marcus Peterson. And I'm just checking out, looking at in San Jose, like what Karlsson was able to do at 5-on-5 last year. You need a good D partner to do that with, although Karlsson did it with whoever he played with in Ottawa. It wasn't really holding him back, but I'd like him to be with someone defensively responsible. Matt Benning was reasonably responsible, like not exceptional in any way, but still on like the helps his team. Whereas Ryan Graves' isolated impacts last year, his defense is not quite as good. So I would like somebody to at least be able to hold the fort so Karlsson can do his thing, but also he's Erik freaking Karlsson. So I don't think it's a huge deal, or it hasn't been through his career, to be with somebody who's not that great defensively, because in Karlsson's case, the best defense has been a good offense.
Yeah. I mean, if Ryan Graves isn't that great defensively, then why did the Penguins sign him to like a 6-year contract, 4.5 mil? It's definitely not for his offense, right? So hopefully, I guess Dubas sees something in him to do better.
Yeah, I think, last year he took a bit of a dip, and maybe it was a systems thing. Like maybe things just didn't go so well in New Jersey. But I remember in Colorado, like Graves had made a real name for himself as like a defensively responsible defenseman. And his first year in New Jersey, Graves did that very well. Last year, for whatever reason, he did not. So I assume Dubas saw maybe an opportunity there to get someone who has performed like a top pair defenseman at a bit of a discount because they're coming off a rough season. And I guess time will tell about whether that was worthwhile.
Yeah, so a lot of places that we can go from here, but let's get back to that power play, okay? Because like you said, we have to now try to figure out the value of Letang, like what's going to happen. Like, okay, Gensel, like you said, he's out for, like he had this surgery. The news came out just a couple of days ago, August 4th, and they said that Gensel will be evaluated in 12 weeks. So it's like 3 months, right? So October, September, October, November. So that would be like November 4th, so that would be November 4th, just to get like reevaluated. That's like, a month into the season. And then who knows if like it's going well. So maybe we should assume like 2 months. Who knows, right? But there's going to be at least a month where the Penguins will be without Gensel, and maybe longer. You look at like who would be on the top power play then. Like obviously you've got Crosby and Malkin and Karlsson. I think those are your locks. Rickard Rakell was there last year, and then Letang was there last year. So those could be the 5 now. While we wait, or like Brian Rust is someone who used to be there, right? Like, and then he kind of got knocked off. So like with Gensel there, maybe let's start there. Okay, with Gensel there, it would be Crosby, Malkin, Gensel, Karlsson, and then either, I guess, like Rakell or Letang would be my guess. Like, are they going to go 3 forwards, 2 defensemen, or are they going to keep Rakell there and maybe have Letang quarterback a second power play, which has Brian Rust and maybe isn't like the worst power play. When Pittsburgh usually has always put just their stars on the top unit, and like who cares who's on the second one. So that's one way to go. So and obviously we have no way to know. Like we'll have to kind of see what they do in training camp. But yeah, to start the season, it could be just like Rakell and Letang, but I think it's also possible that if their plan is to have Letang on the second power play, maybe he's just starts there right from the start. They put Brian Rust, and you have 4 forwards, Rakell, Rust, Crosby, and Malkin. They've all been there. Erik Karlsson, So I don't know. All that to say, I'm pretty worried about Chris Letang. Like even with Gensel injured, I still feel like but obviously this is just all speculation. Who knows what's going to happen? But yeah, you've already spoken about Letang and how like we have reasons to be concerned. Obviously, at some point in drafts, he becomes valuable. I don't think he's going to be like not draftable. So it will be interesting to see like where he is getting taken on average and like what's going to happen. And also obviously the other thing with Pittsburgh is like they never are all healthy, right? So this is all like, I'm like being like up talking about if it's a fully healthy team, then maybe Letang doesn't make it the power play. But like, when's the last time that's happened for more than like a month at a time? Right. So someone's going to get hurt and maybe it's good. And Letang and Karlsson, like specifically having guys who haven't been too healthy lately. So there might still be stretches, hopefully not, but there might be stretches where Letang does quarterback the top power play, hopefully not for too long.
I'll throw out one other name in there, Elon, which is Riley Smith, who's in the mix now too.
Yeah,
I'm not saying like, he's any more likely than any of the guys you named, but he's in the picture for sure. Like Riley Smith has played on the top power play before. And depending on the role that Pittsburgh's looking for someone to take over for Gensel, Riley Smith shoots left, Gensel shoots left, Brian Rust shoots right. So it wouldn't be so strange to see if Pittsburgh goes ahead and sees if Riley Smith can just step in with the same handedness. They don't make any changes to their power play and just replaces Gensel that way. So he could be a really interesting like guy to get at the start of the year if he does get that power play one. I think he's Riley Smith is already pretty draftable, but maybe you bump him up from late in the draft to mid late in your draft. And then the other comment I wanted to make, Elon, you floated the idea that they could do 3 forward, 2 defensemen. I just wanted to point out that Pittsburgh did that last year, right? We did see Petrie and Letang working together for a little while on that top unit. So it wouldn't be so strange to see Karlsson and Letang both working the blue line or wherever they're positioned on that top power play unit, even with everybody healthy.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. So, it's so fascinating trying to think this through. And we have like other teams to discuss as part of this trade, right? But I do want to just talk about this Gensel injury while we're here, because that obviously is going to leave an opening in the top 6. Like forgetting about the power play, like Crosby and Gensel have been playing together forever. So last season we had Crosby, Gensel, and I think like Raquel for a lot of the season, and then Malkin was with Rust and Jason Zucker. And so, yeah, if you have Zucker obviously is out and you've got Gensel out to start, and now we have Riley Smith in. So I think we're guaranteed to have Riley Smith in the top 6, and we still have an opening, right? We've got Crosby, Smith, Rust, Malkin, Raquel, and now an opening. So I wonder who that like 6th person is going to be lining up with Crosby or Malkin to start the season. Like just so when you have your early stream to start the year. I'm not saying like this is someone you're going to draft because it's only going to be a month or two. But
it's just like who are even the candidates there. You've got Vinny Hinestroza. You've got like, I'm just trying to guess. Like I'm not naming everybody. Noah Lachari has played like briefly in top 6 roles before. Like Matt Nieto's always there, but I don't expect to see him there. I half wonder if there is someone, Elon, in camp who like can make an impression and earn that second line wing spot or top line wing, wherever they find, like wherever the Penguins make that hole. I wonder if they find someone like hungry in camp who has a really great showing and they want to give them an opportunity right away. I wouldn't give any like head start to anybody currently on the roster in Pittsburgh to getting that last top 6 spot over somebody who might show that they're ready for a chance in camp.
Yeah, it's kind of like at a point where, I'm looking at who are Pittsburgh's top prospects, and they've been a team that's been trading their picks a lot over the years. There's not really anyone that jumps out. Like they have this guy it just made me think when you're saying like maybe it's someone that, earns it out of camp. Like there's a guy, Philip Hollander, who was drafted in 2018. I don't like maybe I don't know if I want to throw out a name of like a nobody who could step in, and maybe he's not a nobody prospects people who's taken in the 2nd round back then. So maybe that could be a guy that we can keep our eye on, because there's no one else who said that's interesting.
Well, I'm looking at the prospects list. They have Braden Yeager, who was drafted 14th overall this year. So but aside from him, the Penguins drafted 58th overall in 2021, drafted Tristan Brose, who's 20 years old right now. And aside from that, in the lot, like since, going back at least a few years, they haven't drafted before like 140th overall or 118th. Excuse me. They drafted Sergei Murashov, but he's a goalie.
Okay. Yeah. So let us know on the Discord or in the chat or something if you have a theory. If we're missing someone obvious, I don't think we are. Okay. So that's the Pittsburgh side of this. Let's take a break, Brian, because we've been talking for a half hour about this, and then we'll talk about a couple other teams here. So we'll be back in just a sec. All right, sir. We are back to talk more about this epic Erik Karlsson trade. I guess let's go to the Sharks, right? Who have lost Erik Karlsson, but they have picked up some NHL players. They got Mike Hoffman, who they actually had before. If you recall, when the Sens traded away Mike Hoffman, it was like to the Sharks for like a second before he then got flipped over to Florida. And I remember thinking at the time, like, why did the Sharks give him up for like nothing? Like Mike Hoffman was good, and then turned out Mike Hoffman was actually pretty good in Florida, I guess, at least in terms of scoring goals. Then he went to Montreal. I think Montreal's really happy to get this contract off their books. But now San Jose, I guess, has him, and San Jose doesn't have a lot of great players. So I'd be interested. They also get Mikael Granlund, right? So before we get to the defense of San Jose, which is a thing that's going to be like a scary part of the podcast, but let's be at least a little optimistic, or maybe even not. But like the Sharks do have like some players who can play like forward now. Like, obviously they've got Couture and Hurdle. Now they've got Mike Hoffman. They got Anthony Duclair. They've got Barabanov. Now they've got Granlund, who I know everyone was really unhappy with how he did in Pittsburgh. Like, is there anyone here who's interesting to you? Like, San Jose is going to have to field a power play sometimes. Like, if we're trying to guess who the four forwards will be, they'll be like Hurdle, Couture. Who are the front runners to be the other two? We saw Barabanov there a lot last year. I guess they have Duclair and Hoffman. I guess those are like the five, and there'll be four of those.
I just really enjoy the way you're talking about this team. Like, San Jose has some guys who can play forward, and they'll be on the power play occasionally, and someone is going to need to do that for that. And it's true. Like, it's a team of guys. And as we were talking about on our Discord in the immediate aftermath of the trade, I was saying, Elon, you named a bunch of guys, but there's no one here, at least for fantasy value, that I feel I can really sink my teeth into and be like, yes, this is somebody that I can have a firm expectation of to be reasonably consistent at producing through the year, even if they're on the top power play. I'd say Anthony Duclair probably has the best chance of all the top 9 forwards, say, of being somebody who would last the longest on my team, or someone I'd tolerate holding on to, even if he starts, goes a couple of weeks with a point every other game. But aside from that, I mean, I expect Barabanov, I shouldn't, totally give him short shrift. Barabanov had a nearly 57-point pace last season. The thing is, like, points for him, they come and go. And like, sometimes you feel like a genius for having him, and the other times you feel like a schmo for just holding on to him, waiting for that next sort of batch of points to come. And even with top power play for a lot of last year, Barabanov was still frustratingly inconsistent in putting up points, and also putting up shots. Like, he just wouldn't, even when he put up shots, it still wasn't a lot. He averaged like 1.5, maybe 2 shots per game. And it just wasn't a lot of production to justify a roster spot on your fantasy team if he wasn't putting up points, which, like I said, often he wasn't. So I think in San Jose, you asked about the power play, Elon, you've got Couture, you've got Hurdle, and then it's kind of it's anything goes. I assume Barabanov as an incumbent gets to be on the top power play, and then pick another forward, pick a defenseman. Like, I if I were putting it together, I would start with Duclair on the top unit and have Hoffman on the second unit. And then for defense, well, that's the big question.
Yeah. Well, first, okay, I just to make sure we cover, like, so Mike Hoffman seems like you had no interest in even like discussing. So are you like of the mind that Mike Hoffman is cooked at this point? He's 33. He's coming off 2 bad years in Montreal. Like, are you are you interested in him at all? Like, drafting him in the last round of a draft, or is it like you'll watch and see?
The thing is that Hoffman has had good seasons when he takes 3 shots per game. He hasn't done that for 2 years in Montreal. And I'm not sure in San Jose, like, yes, he's going to a thin roster, but it's another thin roster. The roster was thin in Montreal, and they only used Hoffman so much. So I don't really see where a huge opportunity is going to present itself to Mike Hoffman to be a big producer again. We've seen his best production come when he's riding shotgun with some other guys who are really carrying the load. He's a great shooter. That's might be about all he's great at. And like I said, the shots have slowed down recently. So I could see him being a decent stream, right, as he was in Montreal. But I honestly don't change my value a whole lot of Hoffman in Montreal to how I see Hoffman in San Jose.
Right, which would mean like not rosterable beyond like a stream at
Yeah.
times. And then we have a question here in the chat. Norm is like, what are the odds Eklund makes the team? So I mean, one day Eklund will be on the team and be good, hopefully. Like you'd think so. I don't see a reason why they need him. Like they seem to have a filled out, they got Granlund, they've got Hoffman, like they've got enough pros. They signed Philip Zadina to a contract. I guess he has to like, it's 1.1 mil. I don't know if they're just going to want to waive him right away, though I guess they could waive him. And anyway, whatever. Like they do have enough forwards to like not need to like burn a year of Eklund, because I think, to me, Brian, tell me if I'm wrong about this, the Sharks look like they're the worst team in the league, especially, let's just talk about this defense really quickly. I'm on cap friendly. Here are the defensemen left on this team. So some pros under contract so they've got Jan Ruta in this trade. They've got Marc-Edouard Vlasic is still there, which is like, and like Marc-Edouard Vlasic is still there, and his contract doesn't end until 2026. He's making $7 million a year. Like, when's the last time we've mentioned Marc-Edouard Vlasic on the podcast for any reason? Like, it's been forever. I think we must have at some point. He must have had some fantasy relevance like 6 years ago or something. But
Way
yeah, they
back
have
when he was Brent Burns' defense partner and could
Right.
get occasional points. So he actually used to have some good peripherals.
Yeah, he used to be. I used to have him on my fantasy teams. Like I remember, but feels like I'm surprised. Like I'll bet you people who don't like follow too closely are surprised he's still in the league. But anyway, okay, they've got Mario Ferraro, who's been good for blocks. Sometimes only had 11 points last year. Matt Benning, you brought up, was Karlsson's D partner. So yeah, I guess good defensively. Only 24 points last year. They have Radim Šimek, Kyle Burrows, and they do have some prospects who could make the team. I was talking to Victor before the show, who was on again last week. A very good episode. Make sure to check it out if you didn't get a chance yet. He was saying that he thinks that this guy named Thrun, I think it's Henry Thrun, is he thinks he's ready to go, and is like someone who could potentially take the top power play, because like who else? Who knows? There's also the guy that they got a first rounder that came back in the Timo Meyer trade from New Jersey, Shakir Mukhamadullin. I'll say Mukhamadullin.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Mukhamadullin. It's Mukhamadullin. Yeah.
Okay. Shakir Mukhamadullin, who maybe there's something there, like could make the team. But like overall, this is like terrible defense, right? And like I'd love for you to go in and like project a top power play guy. It might be the kind of thing where even if you get it right, it still doesn't mean you want to draft this person in a 1-year league. Not to be like totally like negative, right, on the Sharks, right? They do have good prospects. Like we talked about Eklund, they just drafted Will Smith. I think they're going to be terrible next year, and they might get a first overall pick like in this next coming draft, and who knows for how long. And now they've like long-term cleared cap space. I know they've taken a lot of like short-term contracts with Mike Hoffman and Granlund. So I don't know. We didn't even talk about like who won the trade or like if this was good. I guess you were saying at the start that you think it's like really like underwhelming for San Jose. They do get out of this contract, and they will stink now for a couple. Like they need to rebuild, right? So the way, if I'm like a pro San Jose guy, I'm going to be like clearly now they're going to stink. Karlsson's not going to help them like to not come in last place like he did last year. Like they could officially be the worst. Hopefully get good picks. Maybe they could like trade like a Hoffman or Granlund or whoever like at the deadline to someone, maybe like, if they could do okay, get picks, get prospects, weaponize cap space.
You can't do that, Elon, because Hoffman would be a rental. His contract expires next year, but Granlund's under contract for another year after this one at $5 million.
But what if he's so good that a team wants him?
San Jose. Yeah, I mean, like you're asking who won the deal. Like Pittsburgh won the deal in two ways. Like the two biggest wins here: one, acquiring Erik Karlsson; two, shedding Mikael Granlund. Like it's amazing that in one fell swoop, Dubas did both of those things.
Yeah. I would say that Montreal actually, like, obviously it's a minor. I think they did really well. We'll talk about them like in a bit. But yeah, as far as San Jose goes.
Yeah. And I also, for being intermediaries, but for San Jose, I also want, like, I just wonder, I don't know for sure, but I know like Mike Greer as GM was being pretty out loud about like, we're not going to retain what teams are asking us to retain. So they ended up retaining like 1.5 million, which I don't know, Elon, if you can do the quick math, like that's like 10 to 20% of Karlsson's contract. And by doing that, but by only taking so much, the Sharks limited the market for Karlsson, right? Like that only so many teams could afford to take on 80% of Erik Karlsson's contract, short, medium, long term. So I wonder if there was a if San Jose could have paid more of Karlsson's contract and gotten more in return, of course, this is just a wonder. I don't know.
But okay, I guess we should at least throw out a name. Like, if you had to bet, who's the top power play defenseman on this team?
If I, I mean, like, I'll throw out a name that you didn't mention, who San Jose also acquired today, Jan Ruta. We saw him in a power play role ever so briefly once upon a time.
Where?
Very, like, he was just like filling in for. It was in Chicago. Was it in Chicago?
Oh, maybe.
I think it was in Chicago. He had
definitely wasn't in Tampa Bay.
I'm looking. Okay, and I'm looking again. Like, he had 4 power play points as a rookie in 56 games in Chicago, and has not had a power play point since. And that counts 5 seasons and like 200 and some games. So yeah, Jan Ruta. The thing is that no one on San Jose is a candidate. Though, like, none of these guys on the back end. Like, I actually, from Ian Gooding's article at Dobber Hockey, he pointed out that after Erik Karlsson on the San Jose blue line, Matt Benning, Mario Ferraro, and Jacob McDonald, they all had 1 power play point. No other defenseman had a power play point. So I don't know, Elon. I'm gonna give the early edge to Mukhamadullin if he's ready to step in, which, like, who knows? Like, there's a lot to be ready, although he is already 21 years old. He was brought over in the Timo Meier trade, so you want to put him in a position to succeed, and this might be it. Henry Thrun is a year older too, so he is also another guy that you might look at. We've heard Cicek's name is Nick Cicek. His name has been tossed out as well. He's 23 years old. Yeah, so I would just be looking probably at none of the guys on the roster, and I'd be looking for someone to earn it at a camp, because my imagination just can't go far enough to actually assume that any one of the 6 guys that I'm currently seeing on the San Jose, or 7, I guess, on the San Jose depth chart are actually going to be meaningfully, like, contributing to the power play.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And so I think we're in agreement that this team is going to be amongst, if not the worst team in the league. Like, I can't think of who. Like, I guess Chicago is there also.
You've got Chicago. You've got, I don't know if it's controversial. I think Anaheim is up there too.
Well, they just did they just make a big signing recently?
Yeah, they added Alex Killorn.
Yeah, there you
they
go.
have Zegras and Terry. And
no, the big news is they signed Troy Terry, right? I was thinking, like, they were in the news recently or something. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and then on defense, like, they signed Radko Gudas, but there's not a whole lot. They have Cam Fowler. There's not a whole lot going on there, though.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick. I think Chicago, Anaheim, and San Jose are going to be battling for the worst team, because Arizona, everyone's like, we're talking about this on the Discord, and someone was like, you can't have this conversation and not talk about the Coyotes, but kind of excited about the Coyotes now. Actually, I was going to say it later, but why don't we just jump into this news now? They just signed Logan Cooley to an ELC, so he's going to come in from college like a little earlier than expected, and he's someone that people are super high on. They signed Jason Zucker, who I know you've always liked. Matthias Michelli had a good year, and this is aside from, of course, the Keller, Schmaltz, and Hayton line that finally broke out. Well, like, Keller and Schmaltz have been doing well, but like Hayton looked good. They brought in Bjugstad. And then on defense, they just signed Matt Dumba. So actually, we have 2 signings on Arizona to talk about, Dumba and Logan Cooley. And, they had brought in Jersey, and they had brought in Valimaki. So I think Arizona, obviously you never know, but I think Arizona is a step above San Jose, which isn't saying much, but I think it's like a tier above. I think Arizona is not necessarily a playoff team, but I think this is a team that's on their way, and I think they're going to be decent-ish next year.
Yeah, well, they have a top line, like a bona fide top line, right? You've got Keller, Hayton, and Schmaltz. Like, you look at the San Jose depth chart now, and Hurdle just looks so out of place. It's like there's a top line player. Maybe the Couture could also be a top line player, but he hasn't been deployed that way for a while now. But Hurdle's all alone, and in Arizona, no one's alone on that top line. And then they have like a decent middle 6 too, or I could say top 9. Like, it's a lot of guys, but it's a lot of guys who I'm not like wondering, can they play defense at all, or can they ever, take a shot or move the puck up the ice? It looks like at least like a workman-like group, who can at least keep up and maybe not be a net negative, depending on defense. there's definitely some question marks. Like there's not a whole lot going on the back end there. And of course, in net, we still don't know. Like Vejmelka did not have the greatest season last year. Ingram
It's going to be Vejmelka and Ingram, definitely.
Yeah,
to start.
well, sure, but I'm just saying, like, we don't know exactly what we can expect from them as a tandem. Although it's better than Blackwood and Kakinen in San Jose.
Yeah, I would take that Arizona tandem for sure.
Yeah.
Though, so Brian, let's just actually look at those acquisitions, because you're talking about the defense. So Matt Dumba, I want to talk about Dumba and Cooley specifically, but like let's start with Dumba. So he's like, one of the there's a couple more actually interesting free agents out there, but like Dumba was a big one that people were surprised he hadn't been signed yet. We were into him like big time a few seasons ago in Minnesota, right? Like it looked like he was going to be like a really valuable guy. And then he sort of has really settled into not. Like, I don't know what happened there. Like he had a 50-point season back in 2017-18. And then after that, just totally faded. Oh yeah, he got injured the next year. He was having a really good season in 2018-19, but then got hurt. And then when he came back for the next 4 seasons, just really settled into, I think, like a good defensive player, but like didn't get consideration for power play. And just, so only 14 points in 79 games last year. Now he goes to Arizona. Is there like a chance that he, like, do we have even more? We already had this conversation of Valimaki versus Durzin, who's going to run the top power play. Is it like now Dumba's in the conversation, or do we think at this point we know that that's just not who Dumba is, or maybe just that's not who he was in Minnesota?
I don't think that's who Dumba is. Like there has been talk over the course of his career that can Dumba run a power play. I mean, the evidence suggests that. I should also say, with all this talk in San Jose too, a lot of NHL defensemen can run a power play, right? Like they've definitely done it at some point in their careers. So could Dumba come in and do it? Yeah. Is he any more qualified than Dursey? I don't think so. Than Valimaki? Also, probably not. Dumba had this sort of expectation around him for a while that he was going to, grow into sort of a well-rounded offensive defenseman who's still solid defensively. And that just hasn't come to bear for Dumba. In fact, I don't think he's really shown himself to be great offensively or defensively for most of his career. There have been upticks, as you mentioned, Elon, like those 50 and 56 point pace seasons. But when he did that, the 56 point pace season came with like just 32 games played and a 13% shooting percentage. So we can just write that one off. And the only other time that Dumba's finished above a 40-point pace was that season back in 17-18, where I think his points participation was high. So was his shooting percentage just by a smidge at 5-on-5. But, there was a brief moment in 18-19, that year he did, like he missed all but 32 games, where Dumba was shooting a little bit more. He was seeing a little more power play time, more success with that power play time. And then I don't know. I guess the assumption could have been, was he held back by injury? And we were hopeful at that moment, but I don't think that's it, Elon. And if Dumba was held back by injury, I don't think whatever was hampering him then we've seen it go away. So this is all my very long way of answering. No, I don't see Dumba factoring into the Arizona power play situation.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not interested in drafting Dumba for next year, but I guess it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Yeah, Logan Cooley. So you mentioned that the Coyotes, like middle six, it's like a lot of workman type guys. So we should mention Cooley. I don't think is that like obviously who knows for year one, but this is a guy who I've been seeing a lot of like re-rankings for that last draft. Where the Habs took Slavkovsky first overall in 2022, and Cooley went third. A lot of people are saying now that Cooley is like the best prospect from the draft, and like if they were as a redraft now, he would go first. Shane Wright definitely has been falling on off a lot of lists. There's some good defensemen there, of course. Cooley last year just was incredible for the University of Minnesota, 60 points in 39 games. I guess he had no reason to go back. So I feel like I just want to kind of think of him as like a guy who was picked first overall. Like if people are saying he should have been first overall, he's coming in. I'm going to think of it as like, how do we normally think about, a first overall pick coming in, not at 18, at least at 19, like taking one season, the D+1. Now he's coming in D+2 to start in the NHL. So I feel like I'm not going to go crazy about him. And I just think a lot of people are going to be going crazy over Bedard and drafting him as like a 70-point guy. And, there's also Fantilli, who we've talked about, that might be like underrated, because in any other year, Fantilli might have been drafted like first overall. And then we'd be wondering about like, does he have 60-70 point upside? And we talked about how Columbus has like, a spot for Fantilli, right? Like he could potentially center the top line. It's not like there's anyone super entrenched. But yeah, don't forget Cooley. I think he's also in Victor, and I will do that show that we do every year where we talk about Calder candidates. And like I could see Cooley being surprising. So was it like a
Yeah.
Zegras rookie season type thing, maybe?
Yeah, I think like the big question mark. So for Cooley, if you're wondering about his production, by the way, in the Big Ten last season, playing for the University of Minnesota, Cooley ranked second in the Big Ten in goals behind Fantilli. He ranked second in assists behind Luke Hughes, and he ranked second in points.
Another great Calder candidate, by the way, for next year, Luke Hughes.
Yeah.
He's going to be so good.
And the Cooley ranked second in points in the Big Ten, just behind, again, Adam Fantilli. Keep in mind, Cooley's a year older than Fantilli. So yes, let's get excited about Logan Cooley. I guess my like the thing holding me back about getting super excited about him is if we have Keller, Hayton, Schmaltz on the top line. I don't really like, you've got Nick Bjugstad, or is it Alex Kerr? Like, I'm not sure who is going to sort of anchor Cooley. Like, Cooley plays center. Usually, like, I don't know that I'd expect him to play center right from the start. It's often like a young prospect. Like, he's just 19 years old, right? We'll start off on the wing, but I don't know on whose wing. And maybe that means he plays center, which means the learning curve is higher. So we'll see, Elon, if Logan Cooley can make any noise, given the fact that I'm not sure he's going to be in like a super stable lineup situation. Like, there's a lot of decent players around him, but I don't know if there's any enough to like really anchor a line and give him time and space to do his thing. I also I'll toss one name out before you respond to that too. The Coyotes still have Dylan Guenther, right, who was the 9th overall pick in 2021, and we haven't even mentioned him as a member of this depth chart. He played last season, right? 15 points, 6 goals in 33 games, and then finished the year with Seattle of the WHL. He was great for them, over a point per game in their playoff run, and 29 points in 20 games in the regular season games he played. But again, that's the WHL. Like, that's below where he's basically an overager in a junior league last season. So I'd like to see a longer look for Guenther in Arizona this year. And I wonder, Elon, it might be an interesting thought to try and predict who sees more games even between Guenther and Cooley, and then after that, who has more points.
Yeah, I think obviously it's impossible to know for sure. I think most prospect people would say like Cooley for sure. Like, Guenther's really good, but like Cooley is like amazing good, like first overall pick caliber good. If I had to predict, I would guess Cooley is a center, and centers like Zucker and Michelli or something, like to start the year. But it'll be fun to see. It'll be a fun team
and
to
how
watch,
do you succeed from there is my question.
I mean, you'd be really awesome. And you like Zucker. And Michelli actually was really good last year, for a rookie. Like,
you're right. They're both solid. But again, like, my point stands about just not having that really, really solid presence to play with.
Yeah, I mean, you could say the same about Bedard, and people are still excited about what he's
got
do.
Taylor Hall.
Yeah, okay, it's true. Okay. I'd say Jason Zucker is not that far away from Taylor. I know you love Taylor Hall so much. I don't think they're that different, to be honest.
Top end of Jason Zucker is far off from top end of Taylor Hall.
Are we at top end of Taylor Hall?
It's a great question.
Okay, so I think we've covered that. We haven't covered the Habs side of this crazy trade. So let's get into that now. Pretty wild, because if I recall correctly, Jeff Petrie requested a trade from Montreal. And he had a 15-team no trade list, and Montreal wasn't on the list. I'm wondering, like, did he make the list when he was on Montreal? So that's why Montreal wasn't on the list? Or did he just assume there's no way Montreal will trade for him because he specifically requested to be traded away? I don't know, but it's just very funny. I think that there's a chance, I've been seeing on Twitter, like maybe Montreal will like trade Petrie before the season even starts. If not, then they'll be happy to they could use him, a defense in the depth chart, and then maybe they'll try to trade him at the deadline. Like, I don't think like Petrie's part of the Habs long-term plans, but assuming, like, as we have to right now, like, let's say he starts the season with Montreal. First of all, I'll just say quickly, like, I think Montreal did really well, right? Because they traded Petrie for Mike Matheson, and Matheson had some retention, and now they get Petrie back with retention. So that whole little cycle turned out like pretty good, because Matheson's turned into like a really great piece for them. But if Petrie and Matheson are both there, like, dude, again, like, it's one of these power play questions. Like, is there any threat to Matheson now?
I'm feeling frustrated with Tony DeAngelo also like coming back to Carolina with Brent Burns. I feel like we're having a moment where like the power play quarterback, like the undisputed power play quarterback, is suddenly, I don't think this is really a trend, but at least in this moment, it feels like they're going the way of the number one workhorse starter. And so many crease situations are like, started off clear. Like this is over the last 10, 15 years, got muddy. And now it's like, oh yeah, we might just rest both goalies, and it's a fluid situation. I really don't want to have to deal with that with power play one quarterbacks. In Montreal, I'm going to assume Matheson did so well in the role. And like part of my disappointment is the same way I was finding Letang dropping in drafts to places where I'd feel really comfortable taking him and like happily waiting to draft a defenseman because I knew I could get Letang. Matheson's similar, and we've been singing his praises really ever since he came back from injury. Elon, I think you were singing his praises even before that, to just crush the end of the season last year in Minnesota. So many shots, a bunch of blocks occasionally too, and the points kept coming too at 5-on-5 and on the power play. And sure, it wasn't all sustainable, but it was there, and he was getting 2 or 3 shots a night. You could set your watch to it. And my only concern is that he loses some of that with Petrie in the picture. However, I'm not deeply concerned that that's actually going to happen. Like now I have to at least think about it. It's funny. This is the second time that a power play one caliber defenseman has gone from Pittsburgh to Montreal, right? Matheson started in Pittsburgh too, never had an opportunity to QB there, goes to Montreal, and now Petrie finds himself in the same situation. But I'm going to assume, I have no idea if Petrie, like I think Montreal still has moves to make actually because of their cap situation. So we'll see what happens with Petrie, how long he stays with the team, maybe including a 4th team was just too convoluted. But he is just passing through Montreal. Even if Petrie stays, I'm going to go ahead and assume Mike Matheson is quarterbacking the top power play, but I'm still unhappy that there is a question mark now attached to his name that was not there before.
Well, maybe you should be happy. That just means maybe Matheson falls even farther in drafts, and you can take this confidence and get an even better value pick. Because I'm with you. I don't think, like, even when Petrie was, remember that? So his last season in Montreal was crazy, right? Because he was so terrible at the start, and then And then Martin St. Louis came in as the coach. And then Petrie actually ended the season like decently. Like I think people forget. Yeah. Like he had around a 50-point pace for the second half of the year.
The Petrie and Chychrun season.
The Petrie and Chychrun season. I don't know what that. Oh, the season where everyone was drafting Petrie and Chychrun, and then they.
The season before everyone was drafting Petrie and Chychrun, right?
No, like Petrie. No, like this season is the season where at the start people were drafting them because of how good they were the year before, and then they disappointed them. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, anyway, we're saying the same thing. Okay.
But in the end of the year, Petrie did end up being good. But everyone who had drafted him had already dropped him. And then whoever picked him up out of free agency actually got a really valuable person for their fantasy playoffs. So anyways, all that to say, Petrie was good once Marty St. Louis became the coach. So maybe there could be something there. But I agree with you, Brian. Like Matheson looked really good. And I think if this is going to make him an even better value pick, then I'm happy for that. But yeah, so then the rest of the Montreal situation is they get Casey DeSmith. We didn't talk about, by the way, on Pittsburgh. So they have Jari, and now their backup, I guess, is going to be Alex Nedeljkovic, who is, I think, next in the depth chart. They also signed my guy, Hellberg, over the offseason. So I guess Pittsburgh will have a bit of a battle in training camp of Nedeljkovic and Hellberg. So who's going to be the backup to Tristan Jari, which obviously isn't very fantasy relevant, but it'll be, I don't know, interesting to see who gets that job. I don't think we need to dive into that. Then on Montreal, I guess also they've got now a few goalies to figure out. Like they have Allen, they have Montembeault, who was decent enough last year. Now they have DeSmith. They also have this guy Primo, who's supposed to have been coming up like for years now. So I think Montreal probably, like you said, Montreal probably has moves to make. And I'll bet you it includes moving a goalie if there's a team that's interested in one of these guys.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jake Allen is supposed to be the guy that they keep around for the rebuild, but Sam Montembeault outplayed him last year. And honestly, Sam Montembeault looked like an NHL caliber goalie last year for the first time out of the handful of opportunities he'd had to that point. So Casey DeSmith to me falls below both of those guys. Like in Pittsburgh, he was already, I figured, out of the picture with Nedeljkovic being brought in. And now that he is for sure out of the picture, we know Jari can struggle at times. We know he can get injured. So I'm more interested in Nedeljkovic backing up in Pittsburgh than I was DeSmith. That is to say, though, he's no sure thing. And in Montreal, I'm still not thinking too hard about Casey DeSmith. I think we're looking probably at a timeshare between Montembeault and Allen, unless one does really well while the other does really poorly, which is exactly what happened last year. So it's not at all out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, or maybe Montreal could do something like smart now. Like maybe they can trade Allen, retain a little, get like a prospect. Like who knows? Like maybe they can do something. But for now, like we'll have to wait and see. Brian, we're an hour into this show. We haven't even talked about the big news from your team. So we're gonna get to that in just a sec. I don't know if we're getting to our green boys and red boys.
I have a team.
I mean, I assume back when Erik Karlsson got traded the first time, you definitely did. We'll find out how you feel now. Yeah, we'll be back soon. All right, we are back, Brian. I guess it is finally time to talk about Vladimir Tarasenko joining the Sens. My big question, if I could have him on the show right now, I'd ask him, like, why did you choose the Sens of all the teams you had to choose from? And then he'll answer, and then I'll be like, yeah, but like next reporter here. So why Ottawa? Like what made you think that Ottawa was a good place to go? That was very funny, by the way, if anyone missed that interview.
Welcome to Ottawa. And like, also you have like players. We were having a conversation also with our patrons about why certain players are like, I don't want to like play in Canada. And someone's like, well, that's ridiculous. Like media is the same everywhere. It's no big deal. But like, this is it. Like, this is the stuff he wouldn't have to deal with if he did, or I assume he wouldn't have had to deal with if he signed in Carolina, as was initially rumored. Although like the reasons are obvious for coming to Carolina. But again, like everyone's just trying to get the quote. So they might ask anyway, whatever. Okay. Onto the fantasy implications. Enough media talk.
So the Sens get Tarasenko, who's coming off down year, right? Like ended up with, so we had 29 points in 38 games with St. Louis, and then 21 points in 31 games with Rangers. So a real step down from, he had an 82-point season the year before with the Blues, right? He did really well. And that was a year where he was like not even wanting to be there the whole time, apparently. But like he had this like breakup. Brian had, like, since we started keeping Karlsson, basically, Brian was trying to convince me that Tarasenko is nothing more than like a mid-70s point guy. Then he had that huge breakout and had 82 points. Finally broke that threshold, and then last year fell to like being closer to like a less than the 70s point guy.
I like that you call it like a huge breakout. It's really not a big deviation from the player I've always said Tarasenko has been.
Yeah, I'm just trying to spin a tale here. Okay. And now Tarasenko, 31 years old. Who knows like how healthy he is? He's had some injury issues, but he's going to the Sens, who obviously had a hole to fill because they had traded Alex DeBrincat earlier on. So we're back to, if everyone's healthy, the stacked top six that we were excited about a year ago, right? Where we were like, this is incredible. You've got, Tkachuk, Stützle, Giroux, Norris, Batherson, Tarasenko. Boom. Beautiful top six, all like all-star caliber players. They've also now got like Dominic Kubalik, who they got back from DeBrincat. You think of the power play, and right away it's like, this is a mess. Like if we've had trouble figuring out other power plays, it's like Ottawa to me seems like the perfect team to just go 50-50 on power plays. In terms of star power, you can easily fill two power plays. I can name you right now, Brian, 10 players that could be on a top power play on a lot of teams. Like,
it's the same as last season, except sub Tarasenko in for DeBrincat.
Well, and also add Jake Chychrun, who takes a spot now.
Yeah.
And add in Kubalik, who's been good on power plays in the past. Well, okay. I mean,
but also add some faith in Jake Sanderson you're right. It's crazy. It's crazy the talent Ottawa has on the top end. They're top heavy for sure. Mm-hmm. It's that bottom end that might do them in. But Vladimir Tarasenko likely to figure into that top end. And it's interesting because we saw.
But the question is, does he fit into like the top power play? Because I don't know where he goes unless they go 50-50. Yeah,
I'm guessing not. I really am guessing not. Like I don't think Tarasenko, like that top power play in Ottawa, could very easily continue being Tkachuk. Oh my gosh, Tkachuk, Stützle, Norris, Batherson, and then pick your defenseman between Shabbat, Chychrun, and Sanderson. I don't even know who's going to be running the top unit. And that's it. Like that's a unit that has had seen so much success together before. I don't know why you break that up. And then you have Giroux with Tarasenko on the second unit, and toss Kubalik on there too, and Pinto and another defenseman, and you're good. So I don't think it's great for Tarasenko, honestly, to be in a situation where he's not guaranteed to see top power play minutes. The thing is that he was not terribly productive on the power play last year. between St. Louis and the Rangers. He only saw like a 52% share of his team's power play minutes and paced for about 16 power play points, which tracks. Like that's reasonable. And I don't know that I'd expect to see a whole lot more power play production from him. Although, like I'm saying this, I might be talking out of both sides of my mouth right now because DeBrincat had 30 power play points last year in what I said, like, it could be a very similar situation for Tarasenko. But I will say DeBrincat is a more frequent shooter. DeBrincat is a better shooter. And DeBrincat also is younger, and he might have been able to take advantage of injuries to Norris and Batherson, whereas I don't know that Tarasenko is going to have that same luxury to get a little extra power play opportunity. So on the whole, I don't think this isn't a place for me where Tarasenko can pace for 75 points again, like as he always did in St. Louis, especially given the fact like he's entering his age 32 season. He's getting a little older. Also, Tarasenko's shot rates have slowed down. Well, they slowed down last year. They took a bit of a dive a few years back, and then they took another dive in this past season. But I really don't know if that was Tarasenko basically trying to figure out his role, both in St. Louis and with the Rangers, or if there's something more to it. So I'm going to be watching that early on. But as for whether or not like this like makes me excited to draft him, I don't well, he's changing teams, right? So there's the red flag, and I just don't see immediate like top billing, like for sure top billing opportunity for him. And he's coming off a season that was not his greatest. So all of that makes me feel a little bit concerned about Tarasenko, and I'm probably drafting him as like a 65 point player, but the upside is there to be like to have 75, 80. I just don't know how likely it is we are to see it.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's like nerve-wracking to draft like a lot of these sends. Like, Kachuk is a sure thing at this point. Stützle is probably a sure thing. After that, I don't everyone is a little bit concerning, like just because, yeah, like you said with Tarasenko, like with all of them, we don't know their role, and Tarasenko being older and injury prone and coming off this down year. Yeah, I'm definitely not like excited about Tarasenko now that he's in Ottawa. Like it's fun as a Sens fan, to like now see how they're going to look with all the star power. But yeah, I agree with you that this is not like awesome for Tarasenko's fantasy value. So I think we're on the same page here. Did we talk about, I don't think we did, Matt Murray went on the LTIR for the Leafs, and so he's going to probably not play all of next season. So Ilya Samsonov is going to become the starter for sure, and I guess the backup is going to be Joseph Woll. Do you want to just comment on that? Like, we should probably just talk about it. Like, is he good? Is Joseph Woll someone who we think is like going to potentially be in a tandem with Samsonov, or are we thinking like Samsonov's like a huge like volume guy now because Woll is like a nobody? Like, I'm just curious to get your take right now. Like, obviously we'll do a Schmore Goalies board episode at some point. Like also there was news like Gustafsson signed a contract extension with Minnesota. Not that is that surprising. And it'll be fun to talk about all these like goalie situations. We'll do a whole episode about it, but just wanted to get your quick thoughts on like Matt Murray being gone and this new tandem in Toronto going into next season. Oh, you're muted. I don't hear anything. I don't hear anything. Do people in the chat, do people hear Brian? I do not hear Brian. But let me go and like turn on Spotify or something and see if it's just like maybe it's me, unless someone in the chat could tell me. Oh no, I still don't hear anything. Something strange has happened with my Mutify. Okay, Norm can't hear me. Okay, yeah, my audio is working. Okay, yeah. Just so we don't forget, I was like, what's going to happen with this? Hello? Yeah, I hear you now.
Okay. All right, great.
And your track is still okay on Audacity? Okay, cool.
Still recording. Okay, so you asked me about Joseph.
Like this tandem. Like, right. How do you think the tandem's going to play out? Maybe you could comment on like who Woll is.
Matt Murray is gone. Yeah. Well, Matt Murray is now like formally gone. He was all like, this is convenient for Toronto. And I'm not saying like, I know there was like some drama on Twitter as always, like about like people in Ottawa being mad that Toronto's stashing Matt Murray. Like, that's fine. Who cares? Do you? And like it wasn't going to happen for Murray anyway. At least it didn't look like it was. We've seen the cycle of Murray repeat a couple times in Toronto, and nothing seems to be changing. Anyway, you didn't ask me about him. You asked me about Samsonov and Woll, and I could see it actually being a pretty similar situation to Samsonov and Murray last year, where you have two goalies who both have shown that they can do pretty well in the NHL. They've had their moments. But in Samsonov's case, he's been inconsistent. In Woll's case, he hasn't had a whole lot of moments to prove himself. However, in the playoffs, Woll outperformed Samsonov by a fair bit. At 5-on-5, Woll had a save percentage of .932. Samsonov had a .902 save percentage at 5-on-5 in the playoffs. And the expected numbers like back up the fact that Woll was doing a whole lot better than Samsonov. And in the regular season, of course, in substantially less games, but Woll was also performing very well relative to Samsonov. Then again, so was Eric Källgren. And I'm not about to say that Eric Källgren has a great shot at taking games from Samsonov. So I think Samsonov, as the incumbent, is going to start as like the 1A. But I could see it, Elon, like, I don't know, one situation that comes to mind that I could see playing out is like the Campbell Skinner situation in Edmonton, where Edmonton had Stuart Skinner, or even the Mike Smith Stuart Skinner situation. They had Stuart Skinner. He'd only had a few games. He looked really good in those games, but they weren't really ready to give him a shot until they had to. And then when they did, he played well enough to basically say, yeah, I'm the starter now. That said, I don't know if Ilya Samsonov is going to struggle as much as Jack Campbell. So how wide the door will open to Woll becoming like the undisputed number one. But I do think there's a good chance that Samsonov does cede some starts to Woll. And if things go a certain way, Woll can come into an exact 50-50 split. Or I think this is less likely, but it's not impossible that Woll ends up starting more often than Samsonov.
Yeah, I think either way, it's just important. Like I was thinking at first, like, wow, Samsonov's value's gone up and he's still like not getting drafted too high in mocks. But we do have to remember that Samsonov is a guy who the Capitals like wave, not like, some teams make dumb decisions. Like the Predators waived Eli Tolvanen and he turned out to be really good. And it was like, that was a dumb idea. But yeah, like I don't think Samsonov is like a sure thing just yet. So I wouldn't be like thinking like you should reach for him necessarily. Like I think when we do Schmore Goalies Board, we'll have him like decently high as like a starter, but not like a sure starter, because there's reason why Woll could be something, which is good, I guess, for Toronto. They want to have two good goalies. One other news item, Brian, I just wanted to throw at you. I have a feeling I know what your answer is going to be. Tom Wilson just got extended by the Capitals for like a long time. So he's already 29 years old. He still has 1 year left on his current contract. And now he's going to get another 7 years at $6.5 million. So he's going to be there till he's like 37 years old. I'm just wondering, like, do you think this has any effect on his fantasy value? Like the Caps have like really like, committed to him now. And, on the other hand, we know they hate Kuznetsov, and I think that they're trying to trade him. So like, I wonder, like, I do see that Tom Wilson got some power play time, like at the end of last season, like some top power play. I just wonder if you think like Tom Wilson's been basically around a 55-ish point guy now for the past like 4-5 seasons for the Caps. And, sometimes gets on the top lines, like rarely gets on the top power play, but it happens every once in a while. Like, I'm just curious, like, do we think it's just like, we're going to expect Tom Wilson to be the same next year as always? Or is there any reason to believe that like this contract like means something, that they're putting the stamp on him, like he's our guy?
They're investing in Tom Wilson as he heads into his age 29 season. No, I think what they're doing is they're like thanking him for all he's done for the team over the years, and said like, okay, you're a Cap for life. We're going to pay you handsomely. Honestly, on the open market, there are NHL teams who might not have been willing. I don't know. Look at the contracts that get handed out. I wouldn't rule out the possibility that Wilson could have had the same contract on the open market. So I guess the Caps said that we want you to be with this team. They're about to head into a rebuild, right? Like Ovechkin's getting older. There's not a whole lot that they have going for them down the prospect pipeline at forward, defense, or goalie. You can correct me if I've said anything wrong in any of that. But yeah, for me, this seems like thanks for all you've done for us, Tom. We want you around for like the next generation of young Caps as they're coming up through the pipeline. You'll be on your way out, but maybe you can help set the tone. So fantasy wise, it doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. He's been a really consistent 55-point producer, usually like does not do a whole lot on the power play. Of course, he throws a whole bunch of hits too, takes a couple shots a night. And I think you could probably expect that to continue. But also, I think his fantasy value will definitely decline as Alex Ovechkin declines. Everyone's fantasy value will decline in Washington as Ovechkin declines. So just keep that in mind if you're looking at any longer term situations. Like if you have Tom Wilson in a dynasty situation, good luck to you.
Well, I mean, let's say Ovechkin is gone. Like maybe Tom Wilson becomes the trigger man on the top power play. Like maybe he takes the Ovechkin spot. Someone has to, right? Why not Tom Wilson? I mean, who else would it be? So I don't know. Maybe there's something to that. Okay, off air. I don't think you listened to what I just said because you had no response at all. Like, did you hear me?
You said that maybe he could be on the power play because there's nobody else to be there.
Like I was saying, maybe he could be I was kind of joking. Like maybe he can be like the events, like the trigger man on the power play. If Ovechkin wasn't there, maybe he could be.
And you wanted me to step up and say that's ridiculous.
Or I don't know. I just wanted to know. It just didn't seem like you were listening, so I just wanted to make sure you were.
Well, okay. Here, you know what? I'm not even just gonna listen. I'm gonna come back with a number for you to. Okay. Yeah, Elon, I think that's pretty unlikely. Like Tom Wilson through his career has never been more than like a meh shooter, but in his expected goals rates or shooting percentage. No, I don't think Tom Wilson is like this sniper power play converter in waiting. Again, he's age 29. I feel like 95% of NHL players, what we're going to see, we've seen by age 29. Fair. So maybe there's something there. Maybe Tom Wilson's in that 5%. I have a feeling he's not.
Yeah, I also saw a fun comment on our Discord at one point, Brian, that someone was suggesting that maybe the Caps don't even really care about building like a good team for the future or anything. Like at this point, like all of their investment is into just helping Ovechkin break the goals record. So they just are interested in having good guys for Ovechkin to play with for the next 4 seasons, because that's probably going to sell more merchandise and sell more tickets than like a cup run would anyways. So that's all they need to care about. They don't have to worry about like prospects or anything like that, which that was an interesting take because it's probably right. Like that's really where the money's going to be made in Washington. Yeah, I'm excited for it.
Yeah, and he'll be around to throw help. Dirty hits to protect all those prospects as they play their first NHL games.
Yeah,
just kidding, Caps fans, but not kidding at all the other fans.
Right, Brian. So that's it for the news. We're almost on our runtime, but okay, we had last episode prepared a bunch of green boys and red boys. So why don't we finish the green boys, because we actually didn't finish them. So these are players who had a better second half than their first half. And like the purpose of this exercise is to look into if there was something different about them in one half versus the other. Instead of looking at their total points, maybe actually this player is more of one half versus the other. So maybe we could dig it, see if maybe there's some hidden value there, especially for these players to be better in the second half. Maybe that's the real version of the player we can expect moving forward. So one guy just picking up on our green boys there. I hope everyone's clear. I wish I could if I was teaching a class, because everyone understands, are we good on the same page? But I'll just hope that everyone is with me here. But yeah, so we're going to go to Sam Reinhart. Okay. So he is someone who overall on the season had a 67-point season, played all 82 games, pretty meh, fine. Like if I'm now looking to do my next draft, it's he's just one of those guys, obviously you're not going to leave him undrafted. He's going to be taken. He's going to have some value, but he's also doesn't feel like a game breaker. But then when you look deeper, Sam Reinhart stunk for the first half of the year, only 26 points in 41 games. And then he exploded in the second half and was a point per game player, had 41 points in his final 41 games. So going into next year makes me wonder, like I was saying, maybe Sam Reinhart is a great value pick in drafts if we think he could just continue what he was doing at the end of last year. But of course, that would require Brian to explain to us what happened. Why was he so bad to start and so awesome at the end? So let's hear your Sam Reinhart deep dive.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, big picture, Reinhart had an 86-point pace in his first year in Florida, followed up by the 67-point pace that you just sort of got into in Reinhart's second year in Florida. It kind of mirrored that in the two halves of the season. Sorry. And that first and second year were kind of mirrored in the two halves of this past season for Reinhart, which really were basically an even split of a 52-point pace in the first half and an 82-point pace for Reinhart in the second half. And part of me was actually wondering if this is like deceptively simple, because in the first half, Reinhart barely played with Alex Barkov. And in the second half, Reinhart played a ton with Barkov, but he also played with Eric Stahl and Ryan Lomberg quite often. And in the first half, Reinhart actually did better with Anton Lundell than with Alex Barkov. So I think it's not actually just about playing with and without Barkov. I think part of this is definitely the power play for Reinhart. He had 17 power play points in the second half versus 10 power play points in the first half. So that basically covers half of the discrepancy in point pace, like 30-point discrepancy. Oh, sorry. So that basically covers like a nice chunk of the discrepancy in Reinhardt's different point paces in the first and second half. Reinhardt did shoot 26% on the power play in the second half, which helped, but his expected goals rates and actual goals rates line up perfectly. So really, I think what we should, like, that 26% for Reinhardt in the second half was not like an aberration or spike. That might actually just be where Reinhardt's shooting should be. And he could just keep putting up 30 power play points a year, which is what he did in his first year in Florida. Like, really strange. Honestly, like, I kept digging for Reinhardt and I'm like, oh, well, so he had some bad variance in the second half when he was crushing it, but he also had bad variance in the first half too. Like, Sam Reinhart had a very strange year where things seemed to go wrong for about 82 games, but some things started going right for the final 41. And so I think even looking at Reinhart having that 82-point pace just through the second half means that the good variance washed out the bad variance, and assuming that everything regresses to normal, that is about what I expect Reinhart to be able to do next year. He had a power play point every other night on average in the second half, which is probably a little high for power play contributions, but that is the good variance that washed out the bad variance. And on the whole, I'm a believer that Reinhart is still a point per game player in Florida. So for anyone drafting him or looking at him on draft day in those first few rounds of your draft, when the point per game guys are melting away and Reinhardt's a little further down because he had a rough first half last season, I would be willing to toss that first half out and just think Reinhardt is going to be able to be another point per game player that you might get 10 or 15 draft spots later than the rest of those point per game players.
Wow. Okay. I'm with you. I love that. And yeah, I always love to hear a good potential draft steal. Not like he won't be like a steal. You'll have to like still draft him like relatively high. But yeah, if you could get him a little bit later, that could be huge value for you. Next up, I remember Mikael Backlund's, like, I feel like I already had forgotten actually how crazy the end of his season was. Like, I remember on the pod, like once I like was looking at this, I remember like, oh yeah, like we got on the podcast and like for weeks at a time, like there was just, every week we were talking about this line of like Backlund and, oh man, I'm actually blanking. Who was it even? Let me, one sec.
It was Backlund, Coleman, and Mangiapane, wasn't it?
Was it even Mangiapane?
You might want to fact check me on that though. We had a name for them. It was back. He was playing with Huberdeau and Coleman for the last 15 games. The rest of the time is Coleman and Mangiapane.
Yeah.
And
okay, I'll just say
he was really good for like 40 games. So
yeah, I'll say. Okay, I'll just go from like.
Oh, didn't Luce call it like the eat, pray, love line or something?
Yeah. Why was
what
that?
was it?
I don't know. Okay. Mange is like the eat.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway. I'll just start this over.
Okay.
The next guy, Brian, I want to talk about, Mikael Backlund. I'll be honest, Backlund, like I forgot about how crazy his end of the season was last year until I started like doing this exercise. But then as soon as like I saw his name on the list of like a glaring green boy, it all like flooded back to me. Like there were so many weeks in a row at the end of the season where we were like marveling over like him and also like Blake Coleman were like doing so good and they were available and like no one was grabbing them for so long, just because it seemed like we had like, we knew the book on Mikael Backlund at this point, right? Like he's not a young guy. He's like already 34 years old. He's never been more than like a 50-ish point guy. And the start of last season, he just was doing his regular Mikhail Backlund thing. Like he had a 42-point pace, like 21 points in his first 41 games. Then out of nowhere, 35 points in his final 41 games, which is a 70-point pace player. And this is not just some aberration. This was for a full half season of 41 games where he just kept producing. And so going into next year, like I did that mock draft recently on the Discord, and like he was falling like so far, like no one was taking him, like just having people ranked by their points per game from last year. And I ended up getting him like the 17th round, I think, like really close to the end of the draft, because I just felt like I had to take this guy. Like, how can I leave him? But maybe you'll explain that actually the whole second half was just a big aberration. But I remember at some point you said, at least for that moment in time, you were like, I believe in what he's doing and like you should add him. And anyone who did was really happy they did. But like now going into a new fresh season for this weird Calgary Flames team where we have no idea like who's even going to be there. Like, is Elias Lindholm going to get traded? Who even knows? But like, as the team looks now, is Backlund someone that can come close to being a 70-point guy like he was for the second half of last year?
I don't think so. I just want to do the conversion for anyone wondering, like 17th round in our mock drafts would be like 245th overall. Like that's the middle of the 17th round. So yeah, like really late, basically at the tail end of most drafts and player pools. And it would, I mean, like what's funny about this big end of season outburst from Backlund, like you mentioned that the whole second half was pretty strong, but it was mostly based on that month, mid-January to mid-February, when Backlund had 5 goals, 14 assists for 19 points in 16 games, and was also suddenly taking like 3.5 shots per game, had a few power play points, a shorthanded point, and all of that got Backlund to a career best 56-point pace. Like this is Backlund's basically been a 45 to 55 point guy for a decade. And if he's not in that range, he's more likely to be lower than higher. But this is the first time the Backlund has broken out of that range. So yeah, how was the second half of Backlund's season so successful? Some of it, Elon, is not like I'm not going to chalk it all up to variance here. He had a bigger role to play on the team. He was playing 19 minutes a night versus 17 and a half from the first half of the season. So an extra several shifts. Backlund had some more time on the power play, both on the top power play, and also like he had Huberdeau join him on the second unit. And altogether, Backlund was seeing another 30 or 40 seconds of power play time a night during the second half of the season. So like a little Huberdeau demotion helped Backlund too. It also and that probably helped Backlund to maybe, like if I wanted to quantify it, maybe 5 more power play points than he'd have had otherwise. And then he also picked up 2 shorthanded points, which aren't like terribly repeatable, but he does play that role a lot. So you can't necessarily take them away from him. And honestly, that's mostly it, big picture, for the second half of Backlund. It was a little extra opportunity at 5-on-5 to score and some more opportunity on the power play. But also we should definitely, as I already mentioned, give him credit for taking those extra shots with those extra minutes. Like Backlund's never been a big shooter, but he was over 3 shots a game in the second half of the season for the first time in his career. He was shooting more all season than he had in the past, and then he really turned it up in the second half, and that helped Backlund score a couple more goals. But at the same time, Backlund is one of the lowest converting forwards in the NHL. He's like, over his career, Backlund scores on 8% of his shots, which is a high-end defenseman. So even if Backlund takes another half shot per game all next season, it's not like a reason to get super excited. I mean, it is maybe for your shots on goal totals, but it adds 3 goals to his total number based on his usual percentages. So I guess, now that we've sort of understood, I hope, why Backlund was so successful in the second half, extra shots, extra minutes, extra power play time. The question is, can it happen again? And I guess if we peak at the top power play in Calgary, Toffoli's gone. So there is a spot, right? So Kadri, Lindholm, Huberdeau is up there too. And then the fourth, the fourth spot could be Backlund or Mangiapane, or I don't know, someone like Blake Coleman. Could be anyone, right? We have
Sharon
a new coach.
Govich, I guess, came back for Toffoli.
Could be. I would be surprised if he got the look there. But it's a new coach, right? Ryan Huska. And I'm wondering who's going to play on the top power play. That was not the best delivery, but I tried. I think really for Backlund, big picture, you're wondering if you should draft him earlier than in the past. I think most of his amazingness last season came from that 15-game run. It was very special teams oriented. And I'm without knowing that he's definitely going to get that. And even if he does, I'm still feeling like Backlund's like that classic 45 to 55 point player, maybe on the higher end of that range than the lower end of that range. Without wanting to end on a down for Backlund, I also like this is let's take a moment to celebrate how great Backlund is. He won the King Clancy Award last season, was 6th in Selke voting, and deserves it according to Hockey Viz's isolated impacts. Backlund, when he's on the ice, adds 10% to his team's expected goals rates and subtracts 7% from his opponent's expected goals rates at 5-on-5. Both numbers are very, very good. So way to go, Mikael Backlund, for being a solid, responsible, effective two-way center.
I had to look up what the King Clancy Trophy is for. It's for being a leader.
Leadership.
Leadership qualties. Can you name another Clancy winner from the past few years?
I was actually looking at the list like yesterday, and I feel like I can. Well, I've already erased it from my memory.
One person is someone we talked about on the show, someone who was involved in a transaction just today. Does that help? Does that help at all?
Was it Jeff Petrie?
Matt Dumba won it in 2020.
Wow. So yeah, I guess it's not it's really not something to laud him for. No. I wanted to laud Mikael Backlund. So it's like community involvement, right? Like that type of leadership.
No, I don't. Oh, on and off the ice. Yeah. So community also. Yeah.
Good for him.
But I mean, okay, but the Selke's also about being well, it's nice to know he's a good guy. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go to the flip side here. Oh wait, actually, no. Yeah, good guy. And yeah, I think he is interesting as I agree with you, Brian, that he's not like someone to expect, 70-point pace from, don't reach for him. But like Shams made an interesting post in our Discord sharing a tweet that was talking about how like don't be the person in fantasy. There was some advice for, like if you're in a redraft league, like the Cupful, you don't want to necessarily use your like late picks to grab someone like with no ceiling, like a boring person, because you're just kind of going to be stuck with that person on your lineup. Now this isn't what the tweet said, but it's like I agree with this. Like, you're just gonna be stuck with this person on your lineup, like not good enough to like get a lot from, but not bad enough to drop, and like you're gonna be seeing good free agents. So you want to kind of like for your like final picks, so, grab people with upside. And he Shams gave an example of like Killorn or something. Like, why even draft him? Like, how many points is he really gonna get? Is it really gonna be worth it? I would say that Backlund is someone who I wouldn't count. Is that like, because I think that he is someone I would be interested in drafting at the end, just because we saw this, and like you said, Brian, it's going to be dependent on if he gets the special teams again and if he keeps shooting again. But it's like he's someone I think that's like we've seen some upside. So I'm like, I don't think it's a waste of a late pick, because you could just, if he ends up being blah, like you said, you drop him, and we have seen that he could be good. So I think he'd be a fun guy to swing on late, but I'm not saying that I would reach for him. That's my opinion on Backlund. I think there's like a 20% chance he could do this again.
Yeah, and you hold him for a week or two to see if he's on that top power play, and if he's not, you just swap him out for whoever else is coming up.
Yeah.
What do you think about? Do you have a thought on that Calgary top power play? Like, who's going to be the fourth forward?
I don't know. Maybe Mangiapane.
Yeah.
Was that good? Was that a good guess?
It's a safe bet. Yeah. I think that would be my odds on guess too.
Okay. Okay, we have one more green boy that we prepared for. I do actually have another one I wanted to ask you about though. Mackenzie Wiegers, I'll just throw it at you. Like I noticed him later on. Like I should have brought him up, because the one I have actually planned here, Braden Point, it's kind of fun. Like I wanted to end on a high note of like a superstar kind of player, because Braden Point already, like, people are high on him, right, going into the season, because after a couple years of being like a 70-ish point guy, Point jumped way up to a 95-point season. So you might be thinking, wow, like, okay, maybe that's even overperforming. Like, I don't know, after being a 70-point guy. And then before that, he was like an 80-point guy first season. So it's like now 95, like, seems like unlikely he'll be able to do that again, looking at his trends. But actually, just the thing is, he is actually a green boy. Like, he was only around an 84 point guy for the first half of the year, then had an incredible second half, 56 points in 44 games for a 104 point pace. So it's even possible from what we saw in the second half of the season that Braden Point is even better than this 95 points that he ended up with. Like maybe we're on the verge of a guy who has 100+ point potential. So I just wanted to quickly get your opinion. I see that he took more shots last year than before. Like, is this a guy trending up, or is this a guy that just had a bit of a, an overachieving year?
Great question. And I'm glad you caught Point, because these guys performing like at the top, right? Like we're already expecting at least 70 points from him. And it's hard to notice sometimes when guys already performing at the high end of the league step it up another notch. And Elon, this is why you're the best at what you do. The last time we noticed, well, you're very good at that too. The last time we talked about a Braden Point 95 point season was that, quote unquote, infamous season where we ad nauseum repeated that Braden Point scored on 40% of the power play shots he took, and that helps Braden Point to 20 power play goals, and in all situations 22% rounded shooting percentage. And after that 95 point pace outing from Point, we predicted that Braden would go back to being a point per game-ish player, and he was for a year. All right. So that was a downgrade from 95 points to point per game. And he did that for a year. Then he fell short of it for the last couple before, boom, Point found his way back to a 95 point pace again last year on, get this, I don't know if you remember the numbers from the first time, but another 20 power play goals. And in all situation, rounded 22% shooting percentage. Just 30% on the power play, though. So you can already do the math there and say, oh, well, he must have taken more shots if his shooting percentage on the power play was lower. And that is correct. So it all feels like it's all just a little bit of history repeating here. But this time I'm actually a little more bullish on Point actually keeping up a bigger chunk of this. I thought before he could keep up some of it, but I'm really encouraged by what I saw from Point last year. And the sort of breakout of the mold he'd been in for the last couple of years was fueled by this incredible 27 game stretch for Point from mid-January to mid-March, where he had 20 goals and 39 points, which was a 120 point pace. He also took 80 shots, so about 3 shots per game, had 9 power play goals too. 20 goals on 80 shots, right? That sounds like a lot in that little stretch, and that's the story, really. But while 80 shots in 27 games, and that's the story, really. But again, I'm not writing off a whole lot of what's going on here. Keep in mind the 3 shots per game, that helped Point reach a career high 235 shots. So it's not only shooting percentage that worked out for Point, he added volume too. But still, there were some percentage help. But still, there was some help from some friendly shooting percentages for Point, and they came mostly on the power play, which is good. Honestly, I'd rather see a little bit of high variance on the power play because that's more likely to be repeatable than high variance at 5-on-5. But here's the thing, though. I still haven't really explained why I think Braden Point is closer to a 90-point player this time around than he was the last time we talked about him. One, well, you can already tell that increased shot volume is good. And I can look at his numbers and see last year, Point was just as good. 2 years ago, Point was just as good as picking up power play points, but his 5-on-5 points participation rate lagged. And the year before that, so the other 70-point season, Point's 5-on-5 numbers were strong, but he was a little less involved in participating on power play goals. And then back to this past season, Point was shooting, registering more than 1 expected goal per 60 minutes, which is really good. That's great. That's high end. And that makes me think that, hey, maybe Point doesn't have to give up all the ground between that 22% all situation shooting percentage we saw and his usual 17%. Maybe he can fall somewhere in the middle. He doesn't have to regress all the way. So I think the picture I'm trying to paint here is over the last 2 seasons when Point has been a little underwhelming, there was bad variance there. And this season, that bad variance regressed. And he might have had a bit of a shooting percentage bump, but it wasn't so big that I think it's going to take a huge chunk off his numbers if it regresses to where I hope it might, which is not all the way down to 17%, but maybe 19, 20%. So when things break right for Braden Point, or rather when things don't break poorly for Braden Point, he's great. He's been doing great for 3 seasons in a row. Well, more than that, but the last 3 seasons have all been good. He's just been facing some kind of bad variance that's working against him. And Point seems to have taken a step forward this past season, both in the quality and quantity of his shooting. He's a high converter. So if he can keep those shot rates up, that's good news. So I don't know if I'm out of turn here, Elon, after 2 70-point pace seasons and just this most recent 95-point pace season. You might call it recency bias, but I'm going to put Point closer to 90 points than 70 points this year. I think where he reached this past season, Braden Point is going to stay.
Yeah, I don't think you're out of, what did you say? Out of line or whatever. I don't think you are. But if anything, because the way I brought this up was that in the second half of the year, he was an 104-point player. So I guess you're not going to go that far to say that he can actually repeat that.
Not going that far. That was a little, I mean, that goes with scoring 20 times on 80 shots, right? That's 25% shooting. I don't think he's going to do that all the way through. So there was a shooting percentage bump in that second half that helped carry him, put some wind in his sails, but didn't carry him all the way. Like he's doing the work.
Okay. Hey, 90 points. Very good. One last guy, Brian, I wanted to throw at you, a late addition. So everyone can forgive Brian if it's not an insanely awesome dive like he just did to Braden Point. But I was just remembering that Mackenzie Weegar is someone that people were so into a couple years ago, right? On Florida. A couple years ago on Florida, right? He had that breakout, 36 points in 54 games, which is like a 55-point pace. Followed that up with a 45-point pace season, which is like, good actually for someone like him, especially in fantasy, especially in a league like the Cupful or a categories league, because he's so good with the hits and blocks. So like being able, if you could have a 45-point defenseman that has so many hits and blocks, that's like very, very valuable. And then he came to Calgary and overall underwhelming, right? Only 31 points in the 81 games. So even though he again had a lot of hits and blocks, it's like not as exciting when he's only putting up 31 points. But he's a green boy, okay? Like Weegar did really terribly for the first half of the year. He only had 21 points in his first 40 games. But in the second half, he was back to being that half point per game guy that made him very valuable in fantasy the previous year.
Can I jump in now?
Go for it.
I was like that production came over like a 2-week stretch where Weegar put up 10 points in 9 games and like, yes, had a little more production over the course of the second half outside of that than he did. Like the first half for Weegar was a black hole, right? It was probably worse than we would have expected it to be. And that second half was really, I think he only made your spreadsheet, Elon, just because of those 2 weeks. And that was late in the season. That was like mid-March. So not even the first person who took a chance on Weegar, but the second or third or fourth in your league who was like, oh, okay, fine, I haven't been burned by him yet, was able to reap the benefits of that. But anytime Weegar has done well, it's come from a really short and unsustainable period of production. Even that 55-point pace season, maybe it wasn't such a short turn of production, but it was unsustainable. We talked about it then. And I think like maybe 31-point pace for the whole season is a touch low for Weegar, but if anything, it's a touch low. Like I wouldn't want to be I wouldn't be wanting to take the over on 40 points on Weegar. I would definitely take the under, and I think he might even be closer to 35.
Okay. All right. Well, I just wanted to throw it at you to make sure.
Yeah. Andy in the chat is mentioning like he could be due for a bounce back without Sutter there. Like the whole team could be due for a bounce back, right? Like there's a lot that could change for the better in Calgary. So there is that X factor there. I don't know. I've just never been a big believer that Weegar is like this offensive defenseman in waiting. Like I don't think there's like this hidden side of him where he's really great at generating offense or whatever. I think he's really, really great defensively, and that's his thing. But I don't think that necessarily translates onto the score sheet or fantasy value beyond those peripherals you mentioned.
Okay, so we're going to call Mackenzie Weegar's second half was actually just a great 2 weeks and not something to expect next season. All right, with that, Brian, we're done with the Green Boys. And of course, all the great news coverage from this week. This has been such a fun show. The time has flown by. Next episode, we won't be doing this. We have a really fun plan to talk about some of our mock drafts and the results there. I don't know if when I throw to you, you can decide if you want to talk more about that or if we want to leave that as a surprise. You've been working on that behind the scenes. But at some point after that, we're going to come back and talk about our Red Boys. We're going to do a whole show about players who had great first halves and then completely fell off. It's going to be the opposite of these discussions, right? Try to figure out what happened to these guys and if we think they could bounce back to what they were doing in the first half or if the second half is more representative. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, make sure you're subscribed to our feed. And before you know it, we're going to hit September and then we're going to all of a sudden be like in prime, like keeping Karlsson time where we're prepping for the season. All this is very good prep for the season, by the way. I hope people realize hopefully everything we're saying is something that you're finding valuable in deciding who you're going to draft for next year. But we'll get into our big shows like our goalie rankings and things like that. So please be subscribed on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your shows. We'd love to have you signed up to get everything that comes your way. Also, we wouldn't say no to a 5-star review wherever you listen to your shows. Help people find the show. No one wants to actually tell their friends or their league mates about a good, I can't think. What's the word for the thing we are? A good tool, a good
resource.
Yeah, resource is a good word. Sorry, a good resource that will help you be successful in fantasy, but at least you can leave a 5-star review to the strangers, right? So we wouldn't mind. We're having a lot of fun on our Discord. It's the last month to hang out for our promotional rate, just $1 a month to hang out, do a mock draft with us and see if you like the community. I think you're going to enjoy the community. It'll be worth it for you to buy us like half a beer per month with the costs of things lately, inflation all over the world, right? But Brian and I have stayed at $5 a month US forever. So yeah, we definitely wouldn't mind if you wanted to support us, come on board. And also that you could, by being a patron, you'll be able to play in the Cupful, the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League, which is gearing up. It's going to be such a fun year next year. Get in there, okay? It's going to be a blast. And you could go to kkupfl.com, cupful.com for information about our awesome league. But with that, Brian, let's cue the outro music. Why don't you go ahead and read any credits I didn't cover? Say anything else you want to say. Over to you, pal.
All right. This episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast was presented by Dobber Hockey and powered by our patrons, including our super supporters, Ricard, Rob, David, Derek, Tom, Zachary, Andrea, Ivan, Aaron, and Patty. Thank you to you, Elon, and Shams, who are still monitoring what remains of Twitter and posting all relevant information on our multiple Twitter feeds, which you can all see from GameDayTweets.com. Logo art by BrandonWeeb.com. Outro music by Pat Roach. This episode was researched with help from Dobber Hockey, Frozen Tools, Dobber Prospects, Natural Stat Trick, Evolving Hockey, Cap Friendly, The Athletic, HockeyGoldies.org, Hockey Reference, Hockey Viz, Hockey Database, Elite Prospects, and also a shout out to Fantrax for hosting our mock drafts.
Yeah, those mocks are so fun. Slow drafts. Why doesn't Yahoo do them? They should. That'd be great.
They should. Why wouldn't they?
But yeah, slow drafts are great because then you don't all have to coordinate. But anyways, yeah, this has been a blast. Like I said, Brian, thanks again, everyone, for listening. We'll be back at you next week with another episode. And until then, just let's all just keep reading Erik Karlsson news and getting excited about next season and buying our Pittsburgh Penguins gear and anything else, Brian, we should be doing while we're enjoying all of that.
Keep doing all you can to make sure that fantasy hockey is for everyone.
Good show.
You want to get my fan? It's not that loud right now, but.
Well, if it's not that loud, then it won't really help.
It's like slowing down.
Because then it won't cancel it. So I guess I'll just have to try to find a spot. I'm sure there's a spot at some part. All right. That was a good one. So what? That was good.
I like when I get like that's like the voice that you and Dina use.
Is it?
I think so.
Hey. Okay.
Was this $4.94?
No.
$4.95.
Was it $4? Yeah, I guess $4.95. $4.94 was last week. Yeah. Well, we're coming up to 500. We should make Schmore Goalies board 500. That would be fun.
Okay.
Let's try to make that happen. But okay. I'm completely out of energy. I can't think of anything to say. So I'll just say goodbye.
Thanks everyone for watching, and thanks to the folks in the chat for being here. We appreciate